The North Sea stretched out in an endless, steel-blue sheet beneath the high morning sun, its surface broken only by the faint white scars of passing ships far below. At 30,000 feet, the air was thin and clean, sunlight cutting hard across the canopy of Lieutenant Madison Hayes's A-18 Super Hornet. The formation flew in precise alignment. NATO aircraft from multiple nations holding steady intervals. In her peripheral vision, contrails layered like chalk lines across a pale sky, drifting into each other in slow motion. The hum of the engines was steady, almost meditative, and the quiet rhythm of breathing through her oxygen mask was the only sound inside her helmet. Madison's hands rested lightly on the throttle and stick, movements small and deliberate, posture relaxed but never casual. Her call sign, Valkyrie, glowed on her HUD, flanked by crisp symbology airspeed, altitude, radar sweep arcs. She glanced at the flickering return on her radar display, a faint, intermittent blip dancing just beyond the formation's forward sector. It had been there for the past 30 seconds, surfacing and vanishing in no predictable rhythm. She toggled through radar modes, switching from range while search to track while scan, then back, watching the anomaly slip between ranges. Electronic warfare indicators whispered in the corner of her HUD, not solid enough to trigger a threat tone, but refusing to disappear. The blip was too clean to be clutter and too inconsistent to be a standard contact. She keyed the mic, her voice clipped and even, Valkyrie to lead. I'm seeing erratic returns bearing 020, range 45. Possible electronic interference. The reply came after a beat, dry and dismissive, the kind of tone that could only come from someone assuming they already knew better. Copy, Valkyrie, likely part of the SIM package. Maintain formation. She let out a slow breath through her mask, eyes flicking back to the anomaly. The HUD glow reflected faintly across her visor, a green ghost shaping itself over her eyes. Beneath her left knee, the flight log kneeboard rested in its strap, edges worn from repeated use. The top page carried her own handwritten notes from earlier in the week. Wind patterns, intercept speeds, and the kind of small, experience-based cues that no simulation could replicate. She glanced out across the formation. Everyone else held their positions without concern, fuselages gleaming in the sun. Her jet sat a fraction higher than the nearest wingman, just enough to give her a clear line over their nose. She cycled the radar gain again, coaxing the signal into view. The return sharpened for a second, then dissolved, as if something were testing the edge of her detection cone. The sky ahead looked empty, a wide and welcoming expanse, but the hair at the back of her neck carried that quiet warning she had learned never to ignore. She adjusted her seating slightly, the motion barely perceptible, as if bracing herself without admitting it. Static hissed in her headset for a moment, then faded back into clear comms chatter. Across the net, pilots traded short acknowledgments about navigation points and fuel checks, their voices calm and practiced. No one mentioned the anomaly. She let the channel go quiet and returned her attention to the HUD. The display's flicker felt almost alive, teasing in and out of existence. A glance toward the horizon showed the same clean lines of vapor trails. Nothing out of place, nothing that would satisfy anyone else's suspicion. She tapped the stick trim with her thumb, keeping her position perfectly aligned even as her mind separated from the formation's rhythm. Her breathing stayed slow, her grip steady. A sense of distance settled in, not physical distance, but the subtle isolation of being the only one watching a door everyone else swears is closed. In that stillness, she trusted her own read over the exercise's script. If something was there, she would be ready before anyone else even saw it. The flicker on Madison Hayes's radar sharpened into a solid contact without warning, the shape resolving into something her systems could not classify. The profile was almost featureless, a perfect silhouette against the emptiness of the upper sky, with no wings or tail surfaces to catch the light. For a fraction of a second, it seemed to hover at the edge of her visual range before it accelerated in a way that no human pilot could match. Her threat receiver shrieked, a harsh tone overlaying the calm hum of the cockpit. She barely had time to register the contact before the first impact ripped through the formation. To her left, a distant fuselage erupted into a burst of white flame, shattering into fragments that spun away into the high-altitude turbulence. Contrails twisted into jagged lines, torn apart by shock waves. A second aircraft disappeared in a blinding lance of light. The beam so clean, it left no smoke. Just a trail of burning debris tumbling end over end toward the ocean. Madison's eyes flicked from the HUD to the sky and back again, each glance confirming the impossible speed of the attack. Directed energy or hypersonic strike either way. The drone was killing faster than the formation could react. The comms erupted into chaos. Voices overlapped in a storm of clipped warnings and half-finished calls. Emergency beacons activated across the net, their tone a pulsing reminder of the mounting losses. Over that noise, Command's voice broke in, cold and absolute, ordering immediate scatter and disengagement. Madison's fingers tightened on the stick, instinct already pushing her into a defensive break. The G-load pressed her into the seat as she rolled and dove, countermeasures blooming from her jet in rapid bursts of flares and chaff. She caught another glimpse of the drone through the canopy, a dark, insect-like form with smooth surfaces and no visible exhaust. It pivoted without banking, sliding laterally in the air with a movement that felt wrong, like the air itself bent to its will. Her radar feed bloomed red with kill markers, icons multiplying in the space where friendly aircraft had been seconds before. In the corner of the display, one familiar call sign blinked her closest wingman, then went dark. The absence hit harder than she expected, a small punch in the middle of the chaos. The drone cut across her forward quarter and fired again, another invisible shot that lit up her missile warning tone. She yanked the stick into a high G barrel roll, the horizon flipping 3 times before she leveled out, sweat stinging her eyes inside the helmet. The airframe groaned under the strain, but her training kept her movements exact. She toggled between radar modes, trying to maintain lock, but the contact kept ghosting in and out, vanishing before her weapon system could finish the solution. The rest of the formation was gone now, scattered in every direction. In the sudden gaps between comms transmissions, the silence pressed in. Her earlier warning channel was dead, replaced by short bursts of coded commands from control. None of them acknowledged her. None gave her a new assignment. Alone in the sky, she steadied her breathing and kept her eyes moving. HUD, horizon, radar, back to HUD, searching for the next move. Another explosion flashed in the distance, its smoke curling upward in slow spirals before dissipating into the thin air. Madison banked hard, placing the sun between herself and the drone, hoping to mask her profile for a few seconds. Her mind registered the scale of what had just happened: multiple aircraft destroyed in less than a minute, an entire joint formation unraveled by a single hostile system. The exercise was over. Whatever was in the air with her now was not part of any planned scenario. The kill markers on her radar pulsed once more, then froze. The contact was still there, drifting just inside her forward arc, as if waiting to see what she would do next. She reset her grip on the throttle and stick, feeling the tight edge of adrenaline against the control of drilled reflex. The decision to stay or break was coming fast, and the air above the North Sea no longer belonged to NATO. It belonged to the machine that had just claimed it. Madison's headset caught a faint, broken transmission on the emergency guard channel, just clear enough to make out the distress. A voice she didn't recognize, strained and clipped by static, called out position data and damage status. The coordinates ran through her mind before she even checked the map overlay. The crippled aircraft's trajectory intersected almost perfectly with the rogue drone's projected flight path. Command's voice cut in before she could act. firm and absolute, ordering all surviving aircraft to disengage and return to designated safe zones. There was no ambiguity in the tone. The exercise was over, and so, by regulation, was her part in it. Her eyes never left the flickering radar contact. She had been in the air long enough to know when orders clashed with reality. The kill markers on her display were still fresh, the memory of the sudden deaths sharp. The damaged aircraft had no chance if the drone reached it first. She slid her thumb across the Weapon Master arm switch and felt the click resonate through her gloves. The HUD's symbology shifted instantly, showing missile rails and gun status. IFF lockouts flashed a warning, blocking her targeting authority under current orders. She bypassed them with a sequence so ingrained she could have done it in the dark, the system tone dropping to a steady green as the restrictions fell away. She began the reconfiguration in precise steps. Radar mode switched from range while search to track while scan, then into single target track to hold the contact steady. She armed the AIM-9X first, its tone cycling in her ears, then loaded the AIM-120. The gun mode icon glowed at the edge of her HUD, ready if she closed to visual range. Sweep angles narrowed to focus on the forward cone, tightening the radar's attention on the elusive blip. Below her, the cloud banks broke apart in jagged white layers, sunlight flaring on their edges. Through a gap, she caught a glint, a brief silver flash that could only have come from the drone's skin catching the sun. She eased the throttle forward, feeling the aircraft respond, the pitch of the engines deepening as she built speed. The urgent recall orders still came in over the primary net, sharper now, bordering on angry. She answered once, a clipped acknowledgement, then switched her transmission back to the guard channel. Listening for any update from the damaged friendly, the strain began to set in as she pushed the Super Hornet into a tight climbing turn, eyes locked on the radar. Her forearms tensed against the stick, small tremors in the muscles from sustained G-loads. Sweat formed at her brow, running down to the edge of the helmet seal. Every motion was controlled, deliberate. She was no longer in formation, no longer part of any plan drawn up in a briefing room. She was alone in the sky, carrying her own set of priorities. Her kneeboard was still strapped to her leg, its pages curling slightly at the edges from repeated use. The notes from earlier missions sat there like a quiet reminder of the value of a pilot's own judgment wind shears in this sector, sun angles at different hours, and the way certain radar contacts had behaved before turning hostile. She tapped the edge of the board with her gloved fingers once, a habit more than anything, and leveled out on a heading that would close the gap. The drone's radar signature flickered, faded, then returned, always just on the edge of stable lock. Each reappearance felt deliberate, as if it was testing her persistence. The radio stayed silent in return to her own outgoing calls, giving her nothing but the low hum of the cockpit and the occasional crackle of static. She pushed through the quiet, trusting the combination of her notes, her instincts, and the steady glow of armed systems across the HUD. Breaking from orders in combat was more than a breach of protocol. It was a line that, once crossed, was almost impossible to step back from. Madison knew the cost could follow her long after she landed, but the choice had already been made the moment she switched her weapons live. The damaged aircraft ahead still had a pilot in it, and the drone still had an open path. That was all she needed to know. The tone in Madison's headset shifted from a steady hum of focus to the sharp, urgent chirp of a missile lock. Her thumb pressed the launch button, the AIM-120 kicking free with a brief shudder through the Super Hornet's frame. The missile streaked ahead, contrail curling into the thin air. But the drone reacted with a movement that felt almost unreal. It pivoted mid-flight without banking, slicing sideways out of the weapon's path as if gravity meant nothing. The missile streaked harmlessly past, detonating in empty sky. Madison's radar flashed an update, then glitched, the contact splitting into ghost images before snapping back into a single return. Her HUD began to stutter, the symbology doubling for an instant, numbers flickering as if her systems couldn't decide what was real. She toggled modes, but the interference was inside the loop now. The threat tone screamed again. A different pitch this time. She threw the jet into a high yo-yo, pulling the nose up hard before rolling over the top, bleeding speed to force the drone into a different vector. The airframe groaned, the G's pressing her deep into the seat. Sweat slid across her temple, inside the helmet seal. The warning came too late. A hypersonic projectile tore past her right wing with a crack that made the cockpit shudder. The shock wave rattled her teeth and the horizon spun once before she caught it, rolling level. Her breathing stayed measured, but the air felt heavier. The stakes sharper. This wasn't a random machine, it was reading her. The last two maneuvers she had made were countered almost before they were complete. She pushed the throttle forward, feeling it notch at the detent, the tactile reminder that she was now drawing on the last margin of her reserves. She broke left, pulling into a scissors pattern, the nose swinging back and forth, trying to bait the drone into overshooting. Each reversal was tight, controlled, the horizon flipping with each pivot. The drone didn't bite, holding a position that kept her just outside an ideal gun solution. She widened the scissors slightly, letting her speed drop, introducing an inconsistency into her flight path. For a moment, it wavered, shifting its angle a fraction late. She felt the flicker of satisfaction but knew it was already adjusting. The radar contact vanished. Her gut told her it hadn't broken off. She searched the sky, eyes darting between HUD and canopy. A sudden glint above caught her attention. The drone dropped from directly overhead, nose angled down like a predator. She shoved the stick forward, diving hard, the G's pulling at her shoulders. At 500 feet above the water, she yanked into a barrel roll, the spray below flashing white as her shadow spun across it. The drone matched her dive, but swung too wide to stay directly behind her. The HUD's cannon pipper flashed briefly over the drone's profile, green for a heartbeat before slipping away. She tightened her grip on the stick, the symbology reflected back into her visor like a target burned into her mind. The moment was gone, but the idea wasn't. She began a sequence of vertical climbs and sharp drops, altering her timing on each one. The drone's path began to show microscopic corrections, small hesitations where it recalculated her next move. That was the opening she needed. Her breathing synced with the maneuvers now. Each inhale matched to a climb, each exhale to a brake turn. Warning tones bled into the steady background noise, part of the rhythm rather than a distraction. She kept her eyes ahead, not chasing the perfect shot yet, just laying the groundwork for one. The water and sky blurred together at the edges of her vision, the duel shrinking to a single axis between her nose and the drone's sleek, featureless body. On the next climb, she cut her throttle for half a second, dropping speed enough to alter closure rate. The drone overshot, barely a movement so slight it might have been missed if she hadn't been waiting for it. The pipper lit green again, but she held her fire, watching it recover, filing the timing away. Her mind was no longer fighting the machine's speed, it was fighting its logic. The more she changed the rules, the more it hesitated. And hesitation was something she could kill. Alone in the sky, the rest of the formation long gone. The only sound beyond her own breathing was the layered chorus of HUD tones, radar flickers, and the muted thrum of the engines. The duel had shifted. She was no longer reacting. She was shaping the fight. And for the first time, since the first missile missed, she believed the machine could be beaten. The drone broke from their circling duel with a sudden, clean drop toward the dark surface of the North Sea. Madison followed without hesitation, angling the Super Hornet's nose down until the horizon tilted into a strip of steel between sky and water. The altimeter unwound rapidly, the HUD flashing cautions she barely glanced at. Below, thin white wakes marked the movement of civilian vessels, their courses slow and steady, oblivious to what was unfolding in the air above them. The drone's descent path would take it directly over the busiest stretch of maritime traffic in sight. The air grew heavier as she pushed lower, the pitch of the engines deepening, the buffeting of turbulence replacing the smooth stillness of high altitude. Crosswinds tugged at her wings, unpredictable gusts shifting across the surface. The first amber flash of the fuel gauge caught her eye, but she dismissed it as easily as she would a distraction in a training sortie. She ran the calculation in her head anyway. Distance to base, estimated burn rate at current power settings, and knew instantly she had already passed the point where return fuel margin was gone. Command's voice broke over the net again, sharp with urgency, issuing the recall order for what felt like the fourth time. She didn't answer. The primary channel felt like a foreign conversation now, unrelated to what mattered. Her world had narrowed to the thin, blinking return on her radar and the line of water ahead. The contact stayed steady but hovered at the very edge of solid lock, as if daring her to keep closing. She adjusted her seat position slightly, locking her knees against the rudder pedals, her left hand closing more tightly on the throttle grip. The metal felt solid, almost warm under her glove from constant pressure. She imagined the amber blink of the fuel gauge as a physical challenge, not a warning one more threshold to push through. The first pockets of low-altitude turbulence hit, jolting her in the seat. Spray kicked up from the water's surface in flashes as the wind tore across whitecaps. The drone skimmed just above the surface, no wake, no disturbance, gliding with the same precision it had shown at altitude. She stayed higher than it by a few hundred feet, weaving slightly to avoid running directly into its exhaust path, such as it was. Another flash of amber in the corner of her vision marked a fresh fuel alert. She ignored it and instead adjusted her closure speed, matching the drone's lateral movements. The flickering of her radar contact synced with the rhythm of her breathing inhale as the signal sharpened. Exhale as it ghosted. Her visor reflected the HUD's green glow back into her eyes, a quiet reinforcement of the thin line between holding contact and losing it completely. The low rumble of the engines at this altitude was different, more guttural. Every small throttle adjustment translated into a noticeable shift in tone. The wind noise rose with each turn, the canopy seams hissing under pressure, the tight airspace between her. The drone, and the ships below, forced every movement to be deliberate, precise. One mistake and debris could rain down on a vessel crowded with civilians. She thought about the damaged Allied aircraft from the emergency guard call, still somewhere ahead, and imagined what would happen if the drone reached it. That picture was enough to silence the last echo of doubt. There would be no turn back. Her hand stayed locked on the throttle, her right gripping the stick with the calm firmness of someone who had already decided on the cost. Alone over the water, with no other military call signs in sight. Madison pushed on, the warning tones and amber blink of her gauges nothing more than background noise to the only objective left in the fight. The water below was a restless gray, wind carving whitecaps into sharp lines that caught the sun in fleeting bursts. Madison kept the Super Hornet low, close enough to feel the turbulence rippling up from the surface. The drone held its position a few hundred yards ahead, gliding without visible effort. She reached up and cut select radar functions, watching the symbology on her HUD fade until only airspeed, altitude, and the gun reticle remained. The cockpit fell into a quieter rhythm, the silence broken only by the low hiss of airflow and the muted hum of the engines. She would finish this on her own eyes, not the computer's. Her first brake was hard right, a burst of speed to close distance. The drone reacted instantly, sliding laterally and maintaining its lead. She banked left into a steep climbing turn, letting the crosswind push her higher than needed, then rolled inverted and dove, bringing her nose across the drone's projected path. The maneuver was sloppy by AI standards, full of small corrections and angle changes that no machine would have scripted. And that was the point. The strain built quickly. The G-load compressed her into the seat, her breath breaking into controlled bursts between clenched teeth. Muscles in her forearms burned as she adjusted the stick by millimeters, every motion tuned to bring the pipper across where she knew the drone would try to slip past. It came into view in a flash of dark metal against the water, its movement so clean it seemed to erase the air around it. She pushed the throttle forward through the detent, feeling the engines respond with a deeper growl. The Pipper steadied on the HUD, a glowing green ring drifting toward the drone's intersection point. She held fire, forcing herself to wait for the exact moment when its predictive arc would align with her unpredictable path. The crosswind fought her, lifting one wing just enough to demand another correction. Her visor caught the HUD's glow. Green shapes mirrored over her eyes, her focus absolute. The moment came without fanfare. She squeezed the trigger, the cannon's vibration running through the fuselage in a short, precise burst. The tracers stitched the air ahead, crossing directly into the drone's fuselage. There was no fireball, no cinematic detonation, just a sudden fracture of its form, pieces spinning away into the spray below. The main body pitched forward, losing lift in an instant, and dropped into the sea with a muted splash that vanished almost immediately into the waves. For a second, she kept her nose on the empty space where it had been, listening to the quiet in her headset. The radar sweep returned a clean, empty arc. The flicker was gone. She exhaled fully for the first time in minutes, the breath fogging the inside of her mask for a heartbeat before the air system cleared it. The amber fuel warning pulsed again, but it sounded distant, irrelevant now that the fight was over. She eased back on the throttle and leveled out, the water stretching to every horizon with no sign of another threat. Alone in the sky once more, she felt the sharp edge of focus begin to fade, replaced by the slow awareness of the strain in her arms, the ache in her neck from constant scanning. Below, the debris had already started to sink, swallowed without ceremony by the gray chop. The only proof of the duel's end was in her own memory and the gun camera footage, and she knew one of those could be erased. Her hands stayed on the controls a moment longer, reluctant to let go, as if the machine might still reappear. When it didn't, she finally adjusted her heading toward home, carrying the weight of a victory that no one was waiting to acknowledge. The fuel warning was still pulsing when the carrier deck came into view, a dark rectangle in the endless gray water. Madison held her approach steady, every adjustment smooth and minimal, letting the crosswind push her just enough before correcting. The arresting hook caught on the third wire with a solid jolt, the jet shuddering to a stop in less than 300 feet. She sat there for a beat, the engine tone dropping, the cockpit air shifting from the heated dryness of flight to the cooler, salt-laced breeze rolling over the deck. When she popped the canopy, the smell of cooling metal mixed with the ocean air. The debrief room was lit too brightly, the walls blank, the table bare except for a recorder and a stack of clipped reports. The questions were efficient, stripped of context, coordinates, fuel state, system anomalies. A few officers took notes without looking at her. Others kept their eyes on the tabletop. No one mentioned the drone. On paper, it was labeled an exercise anomaly. She gave answers in the same clipped tone they expected, her voice steady, her expression neutral. In the locker room, she set her helmet on the bench, the visor catching a faint reflection of her own eyes. She peeled off her gloves one at a time, folding them neatly before reaching into the small side pocket of her flight bag. The logbook's cover was worn, its corners bent. From years of flights, no one had bothered to record officially. She balanced it on her knee and began to write. The pencil strokes quick but precise altitude changes, turn rates, the subtle lag in the drone's lateral corrections when crosswind gusts hit from below, the details no report would capture. Her mind replayed fragments without prompting the horizon line snapping past her canopy in a high G break, the cannon pipper glowing green for the fraction of a second that decided the fight, the steady tone of the fuel warning that she had ignored until the ocean was quiet again. The memory of being alone in the sky stayed with her the longest, not as a moment of fear, but as the purest point of clarity she had felt in the air. When she closed the logbook, She rested her hand on it for a moment before slipping it back into the bag. The visor still held her reflection, the faint HUD glow from her memory superimposed over her eyes. Somewhere, beyond the horizon, there would be another contact one day. She already knew she would be ready.